Welcome to the Epic History playlist on our Tales and Folklores channel, where the past speaks, and we keep history alive through storytelling. African folk tales are more than just stories, they are the heartbeat of our culture, the lessons of our ancestors, and the voices of those who came before us. Here, we bring to life the untold legends, the powerful revolutions, and the wisdom passed down through generations. Today, we share the story of the last cry of Aba, a deeply moving tale of courage, loss, and resistance. A now elderly woman, Ijeoma, narrates the untold story of her young mother, Adanma, a leader in the Aba Women's War of 1929. Through personal loss, cultural wisdom, and the fire of revolution, Ijeoma uncovers the sacrifices that shaped history and the echoes of her mother's final stand. This is more than just a folktale, it is a testament to the power of women who refused to be silenced. Their battle was not fought with weapons, but with unbreakable spirits, their voices ringing louder than gunfire. If you love hearing stories that honor Africa's past, reveal its hidden heroes, and inspire the present, then you're in the right place. Like this post, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and subscribe to our channel to keep these stories alive. Where do we start now? Yes. An old woman sits on a low wooden stool, her wrinkled hands moving rhythmically, weaving a mat with slow, practiced precision. Each thread she pulls is a memory, each knot a story long buried but never forgotten. The fire crackles softly, casting a warm glow over her weathered face. Her grandchildren sit close, their chins resting on their hands. They have heard this story countless times before, yet they never grow tired of it. It is not just the tale they love, it is the sound of her voice, steady and wise, wrapping around them like the embrace of history itself. I was just a little girl when my mother, Adanma, changed the course of history, she begins, her tone steady, unwavering. My memories of her are not the kind found in books, nor the polished tales told in hushed tones by those who never stood in the heat of that moment. No, my memories are raw, alive, and filled with the scent of burning wood, the hum of market women's voices, and the steady rhythm of my mother's footsteps as she walked to the place where fate awaited her. People remember the Aba Women's War, but they forget the women who made it possible. The women whose hands molded clay pots, pounded yam, and pressed palm oil, whose labor built homes, clothed children, and kept the fires of our village burning. The mothers who wiped sweat from their brows as they stood in the fields, the daughters who carried loads too heavy for their small backs, the wives who kept their families together even when the world pushed against them. They do not speak of the women who gathered beneath the Udala tree in the dead of night, whispering plans into the wind. They do not name the women whose voices became weapons, whose bare feet marched across red earth, shaking the ground beneath them. This is not just history to me. It is the sound of my mother's voice, steady and fierce. It is the echo of her laughter before dawn, the warmth of her arms around me before the world called her to battle. This is my story, my mother's story. And today, I will tell you the truth that no one else will. Because the world may forget their names, but I never will. In traditional Igbo society, women were not mere bystanders in their communities, they were the lifeblood that kept villages thriving. They were traders, farmers, and decision-makers, their hands shaping the economy just as surely as they shaped the next generation. The markets belonged to them, not just as a place of commerce, but as a center of governance, where disputes were settled, alliances were formed, and the rhythm of daily life was dictated by the voices of women. Their influence extended beyond their homes. They were custodians of tradition, priestesses who mediated between the living and the spirits, and formidable forces in communal leadership. But with the arrival of British colonial rule, these roles were threatened. The British, unfamiliar with a society where women wielded such power, sought to impose their own systems, ones where men alone were recognized as authority figures and where women's contributions were diminished. They dismantled the existing structures, replacing them with a colonial administration that disregarded the centuries-old balance of power between men and women. Then came the tax collectors, men who had not earned their place through wisdom or leadership but were instead handpicked by colonial officers. These were not elders, not titled men who understood the delicate intricacies of their communities. They were opportunists, enforcers of foreign laws that had no roots in Igbo tradition. And the people, especially the women, resented them. In April 1927, the British administration introduced a direct taxation policy, initially targeting men. It was a move that sent shockwaves through the villages, tightening the noose around families already struggling under the weight of colonial demands. The men bore the burden first, their meager earnings sliced away by a system that saw them as mere subjects, not as humans with obligations, families, and traditions to uphold. The tax was not just a financial strain, it was an insult. In Igbo society, the relationship between a man and his labor was sacred. What he earned was his, to be shared with his family, to be used for the betterment of his household. To have it taken by a faceless foreign power, enforced by men who had no standing, was an affront to everything they believed in. Yet, even as the men struggled under this weight, the worst was yet to come. The British, emboldened by their success, set their sights on the women. They saw the thriving markets, the exchange of goods and wealth, and they decided that the women, too, must pay. What little they had, they wanted to take. But the women, strong as they were, would not submit so easily. My mother was not a warrior. She did not carry a sword or wear the beads of a chief. She was an ordinary woman, a widow, and a mother, yet her strength was something even the mightiest feared. She had no wealth to her name, no husband to speak for her, no title that demanded respect. But she had her dignity, and to her, that was worth more than gold. She was a trader, a woman of the marketplace. Every morning, long before the sun stretched its fingers across the sky, she would rise, tie her wrapper firmly around her waist, and balance a heavy basket of gari on her head. With steady steps, she would walk the long road to our bar, her bare feet pressing into the red earth, her mind set on the day ahead. The market was her battlefield, her voice her weapon, her hands the tools that kept our home standing. She bartered, she laughed, she fought for every coin, because she knew that each sale meant food on our table, cloth on my back, and another day of survival. But in 1929, something changed. The air in our village grew heavy with whispers, hushed voices that carried fear from one household to another. The white men, the Ndibaki, had already taxed our fathers, our brothers, our husbands, stripping them of what little they had. And now, they turned their greedy eyes toward the women. They wanted to take from the very hands that fed the land, from the women who bent over their farms under the scorching sun, from the traders who woke before dawn to earn an honest living. It was an insult, an injustice. To tax the men was cruelty, but to tax the women, the ones who bore the weight of families, who toiled in the markets and the farms, who carried life within them, was an unforgivable crime. My mother saw it for what it was, a final attempt to break us. But my mother, Adanma, would not let that happen. She did not need a man to fight for her, nor did she wait for permission to act. She looked at the world that sought to strip her of her dignity, and she stood. She stood for herself, for me, and for every woman whose hands had built the very society that sought to crush them. It was morning when the tax collector came. I remember how the air smelled of wood smoke and roasted plantains, the familiar warmth of home before the world outside disrupted it. My mother, Adanma, was kneeling on a woven mat, fanning a pot of bubbling soup, her face calm, her mind deep in thought. I sat beside her, plaiting my doll's hair with small, nimble fingers, unaware that the moment before us would change everything. Then, a voice like a whip cracked through the air. "Adanma." I looked up. A shadow loomed at the entrance of our small hut, long and imposing. He was tall and thin, his hat tilted carelessly to one side. They called him Odogwu, but there was no honor in his name. He was not a warrior, not a leader, only a servant of the white men, a tax collector sent to count what was never his to take. In his hands, he carried a long stick, a tool of intimidation, and a piece of paper filled with strange markings, marks that determined who must pay and who must suffer. "How many goats do you own? How many children? Count them for me," he barked. The demand filled our small hut like an unwelcome guest, heavy and suffocating. My mother did not move at first. Slowly, she wiped her oily hands against her wrapper and turned to me, her eyes meeting mine for a brief, fleeting moment. Then she looked at him, and to my surprise, she laughed. It was not a laugh of amusement, nor of fear. It was short, sharp, bitter, the kind of laugh that cut through pretense like a knife through unripe fruit. "Go and count your own wife's children, Odogwu," she said, her voice even. Silence. Then, his face darkened, his grip tightening on the stick in his hand. He took a step forward, his chest rising as if to fill the space between them. He wanted to strike, to remind her of the power he thought he had. But my mother did not flinch. "You will not take from us anymore," she told him. Her voice was not loud, yet it carried the weight of generations. "We are not slaves. We are not fools." Odogwu sneered, his voice dripping with scorn. "You have no husband to speak for you, Adanma. Who will protect you now?" The words cut through the air like a blade, but my mother did not falter. Her fists tightened, her breath steady. Without another word, she turned and stormed toward the market, her wrapper swaying with each determined step. At the market square, she climbed onto an empty stall, her voice rising above the chatter. "Enough," she cried. "Gather, sisters. Tonight, we meet under the Udala tree. If we do not rise now, we will be slaves forever." That night, the women gathered under the great Udala tree, its wide branches stretching out like protective arms above them. The moon hung low, casting a silver glow on their determined faces. They came in silence, but their hearts pounded with unspoken rage, their feet pressing against the cool earth as if drawing strength from the land itself. My mother, Adanma, stood at the center, her presence commanding, her voice steady. "They have pushed us too far," she declared, her words cutting through the night like the crack of thunder. "If we do not stand today, they will take our daughters tomorrow." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The women glanced at one another, the weight of her words settling over them. They thought of their daughters, their sisters, their unborn children. The fear they had swallowed for so long began to twist into something else, something sharper. Chinelo, a young widow barely past 20, clutched her sleeping son to her chest. Her voice trembled, but her resolve did not. "My son will not grow up in fear," she said. "We will fight." From neighboring villages, the call spread. Nena, a mother of 5 from Umuaria, her wrapper tied tightly around her waist. "I will not watch my daughters be counted like livestock," she vowed. Obianuju, a weaver from NG Double, followed, carrying a wooden staff. "They tax us as if our hands have not built this land," she spat. Then came Amaka, the swift-tongued market woman, her voice already raised in protest. "We must remind them who we are," she cried. Together, they invoked the ancient practice of sitting on a man, an old Igbo custom of resistance. They sang defiant songs, clapped their hands, and beat sticks against the ground, sending a tremor through the village. Their voices wove into the night, a sound too powerful to be ignored. And so, the war began, not with guns or swords, but with the voices of angry women, ready to reclaim what had been stolen from them. By dawn, the women were ready. From every corner of the land, they came, widows, traders, mothers, daughters, marching barefoot toward our bar. Thousands joined, their numbers swelling with each passing village. Some carried palm fronds, symbols of peace, others banged on metal pans, their rhythmic clanging echoing through the roads. The dust rose beneath their feet, but they marched on, their voices growing louder, their spirits unbreakable. At the front, Adanma walked beside Ijeoma, the old storyteller, whose voice had once lulled children to sleep but now roared like thunder. "We are the backbone of this land," Ijeoma shouted, "and we will not be broken." Beside her was Ugochi, the fearless trader, who had once negotiated prices with the toughest men in the market. Now, she raised her fist and declared, "No more taxes. No more thieves among us." As they neared our bar, colonial officers peered from their stations, bewildered by the sea of women approaching with purpose and fury. Thousands of women filled the streets of our bar, their voices rising like a storm, their bare feet pounding against the red earth in defiance. The sun bore down upon them, but they did not waver. Some carried palm fronds as symbols of peace, others held wooden sticks, but the loudest among them were those who banged on metal pans. The rhythmic clang of iron against iron echoed through the town like war drums, a sound that could not be ignored. Clang, clang, clang. The metallic noise rang through the air, sharp and unrelenting, a call to battle that sent shivers down the spines of those who dared to oppose them. The women struck their pans with wooden spoons, with stones, with whatever they could find, creating a chaotic, deafening roar that drowned out all other sounds. The colonial officials inside the native courts could hear them long before they saw them. The British officers peered through the narrow windows of their offices, their faces twisted in confusion. This was no ordinary gathering. It was a force, a reckoning. Outside the courthouse, the warrant chiefs stood nervously, their hands clasped behind their backs as they faced the swelling crowd. They had been appointed to control these women, to enforce the foreign laws imposed upon them. But now, as the noise of the banging metal grew louder, as the women's chants filled the air, they felt their grip on power slipping. Adanma stepped forward, her hands steady, her chin high. "We will not be silent," she shouted above the clanging. "We will not be robbed." The women answered with another resounding clang of their pans. The walls of the courthouse shook. The British officials inside whispered among themselves, their discomfort evident. This was not how things were supposed to be. Women were not supposed to fight back. But the banging continued, relentless, like the heartbeat of a revolution. Clang, 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 until justice was heard. The protests had swelled beyond anything the British had anticipated. 4 days, the women had stood their ground, their voices unwavering, their bodies unyielding. The courthouse steps, once a place of colonial authority, had become a battlefield not of violence, but of sheer willpower. Frustrated, the British officials, their patience worn thin, sent word to the armed forces. The soldiers arrived in rigid formations, their khaki uniforms stiff under the afternoon sun. Rifles gleamed in their hands, bayonets fixed, their expressions hard. They had been called to restore order, but what they found was something they did not understand: women, unarmed, standing shoulder to shoulder, their voices still rising in defiance. The commander stepped forward, his voice sharp. "Disperse at once, or we will be forced to act." Adanma, standing at the forefront, did not flinch. She met his gaze, her chin lifted, her voice steady. "We will not move. We are not criminals. We are mothers, daughters, traders, and farmers. We demand justice." The women behind her clapped their hands, stomped their feet, banged their metal pans against the ground, the sound echoing through the square like the rolling of distant thunder. The tension thickened, a taut string on the verge of snapping. A soldier shifted uneasily, his grip tightening on his weapon. The heat, the noise, the defiance, it all built into something dangerous, something unpredictable. Then, without warning, the crack of the first gunshot split the air. The world seemed to freeze. The birds scattered from the rooftops. The women gasped, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. A stunned silence swept over the crowd, eyes widening, hands frozen mid-clap. Then came the second shot. And the third. Then, as if the earth itself had taken a breath, chaos erupted. Panic erupted like a sudden storm. The once unyielding women now screamed, some running, some falling, others clutching one another in shock. The sharp, acrid scent of gunpowder mixed with the sweat and dust of the afternoon heat. Bullets tore through the crowd, striking bodies, shattering the moment of peaceful defiance into one of terror and bloodshed. Amidst the chaos, Adanma stood firm. A bullet had found her, tearing through the fabric of her wrapper, darkening it with blood. She staggered but did not fall. Her breath was heavy, her body weak, but her spirit remained unbroken. She raised her fist. "Do not stop," she cried, her voice straining but defiant. "We are the mothers of this land. We will not kneel." The women, through their tears and fear, still heard her. Some, even as they cowered, found the strength to lift their voices in one last cry of resistance. But Adanma's strength was fading. Her knees buckled. She fell to the ground, her breathing ragged. I rushed to her, my tiny hands pressing against her wound, as if I could hold her life in place. She looked at me, her eyes filled with something deeper than pain, something timeless. "Our daughters will remember," she whispered. And then, with the sun casting long shadows over the battlefield that had once been a marketplace, my mother took her last breath. The wails of the women filled the air, a sorrowful chorus that mingled with the acrid scent of gunpowder and blood. The dust, once kicked up in defiance, now settled over the broken bodies of those who had stood for justice. The march had become a massacre. I stood frozen, my small body trembling, my ears ringing with the echoes of gunfire. Around me, the women who had moments ago been warriors were now mourners. Some clutched the wounded, their cries piercing the heavens, while others gathered the lifeless, wrapping them in their blood-stained wrappers. Over 50 lives had been taken, but the pain of one loss consumed me entirely. The land had swallowed the blood of its bravest women, and though the battle had ended, the weight of their sacrifice pressed down on every heart. The British, once so confident in their rule, now stood uneasy. They had underestimated the power of unarmed women, the force of voices raised in defiance. Their soldiers had fired bullets, but the women had fired something greater: truth, unity, and the unwavering will of a people who refused to be silenced. And the British, for all their might, had lost more than they had gained. In their desperation to quell the uprising, they had revealed the fragility of their rule. The world had heard of the massacre in Aba, and the shame of blood spilled on unarmed women forced them to act. The warrant chiefs, once handpicked enforcers of colonial rule, found themselves abandoned by the very system that had given them power. Their corruption, their greed, their betrayal of their own people, it had all come at a cost. The British, in an effort to restore control, dismantled the warrant chief system, stripping them of their authority. No longer would they extort the traders, steal from the markets, or sit in their courts passing unjust rulings. And the tax. The very reason my mother had stood and fought. It was abandoned. The British, fearing another revolt, dared not impose it again. The markets remained in the hands of the women, their rightful owners. But at what cost? The price paid was written in the graves of over 50 women. It was carried in the silence of those who had lost mothers, sisters, and daughters. It was in the empty spaces at the market stalls, in the quiet that lingered beneath the great Udala tree where my mother once stood. Yes, they had won. But victory had never felt so heavy. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows across the mud walls of Ijeoma's home. Age had bent her back and slowed her steps, but her voice remained steady, filled with the weight of memories. Seated before her, her grandchildren listened in silence, their young faces illuminated by the warm glow of the flames. They were too young to understand the cost of the life they now enjoyed, but she would make sure they learned. Ijeoma shifted slightly, her wrinkled hands resting in her lap. There was a time when women were expected to endure in silence, she began. A time when we were treated as shadows, our labor taken, our voices dismissed. But there came a day when the women of our bar refused to be ignored. Her words carried across the small room, wrapping around the children like an unseen force. They leaned in closer, drawn by the urgency in her voice. My mother, Adanma, was among them, Ijeoma continued. She was not a queen, nor a warrior with a blade. She was a widow, a trader, a mother. But she had fire in her spirit, and when the white men tried to take what little we had left, she stood. She led. Her youngest granddaughter, Nkem, reached for her hand, her small fingers curling around Ijeoma's worn skin. Did she win, Mama Ijeoma? She asked softly. Ijeoma closed her eyes for a moment, inhaling deeply. She won, she whispered, but victory is not always without sacrifice. A heavy silence filled the space between them, the weight of history pressing down. Then, after a pause, Ijeoma spoke again. There is an old tale, she said. The tale of the elephant and the spider. The children's eyes brightened. It was a story they knew well, but tonight, it would carry a different meaning. The elephant was strong, massive, the king of the land, she explained. And the spider was small, weak in comparison, dismissed by all. But when the elephant tried to crush the spider, thinking its size made it invincible, the spider did not run. It wove its web slowly, carefully, with purpose. It waited, it endured, and when the time was right, it brought the mighty elephant to its knees. She let the words linger. My mother was the spider, she told them. She and the women who stood beside her. They had no weapons, no soldiers. But they had their voices, their unity, and that was enough to shake even the strongest empire. The fire crackled again, filling the quiet space left behind by her words. The children did not speak right away. Instead, they sat in quiet reflection, absorbing the lesson they had just learned. Ijeoma watched them, a faint smile on her lips. History does not belong to the powerful, she said at last. It belongs to those who refuse to be silenced. And as she looked into their young, determined faces, she knew her mother's name, Adanma, would never be forgotten. The Last Cry of Arbar is a powerful retelling of the Arbar Women's War, framed through the eyes of a daughter who lived through it. It is a tribute to the women who fought without weapons, whose voices became bullets, and whose sacrifice still whispers through history. Their story does not end here. There are more tales of bravery, wisdom, and resistance waiting to be told, and we have dedicated a whole playlist for that. It will be in the description of this video. If you made it to the end of this video, we know you care about keeping our history alive. Subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and join us for the next powerful African story. Let's make sure these voices are never forgotten. Until next time, keep the stories alive.